just start with introduction to our next speaker, who is a very nice fellow who came here years ago. We'll do this. Erik Nielsen. He first came here with the Maersk organization, and he came initially to run the logistics side. Maersk is a very large, I believe it is the largest container shipping organization in the world, a behemoth in logistics. Erik then enjoyed Philippines very much, decided he was able to convince his powers that he wanted to stay and set up a shared services operation, which he did. And it became, this was in the early days of the KPO, the knowledge process outsourcing industry. And it became one of the most successful in that area. He was then got this call to go back to Denmark, I assume his country of origin, but he again decided to stay. So he liked the place. And he was able to join an organization called Regis when they were setting up their shared services operation, and played a key role in getting that off the ground, and is today continuing to be quite a successful operation in Philippines. Certainly a number of people here today with that group. Then he was able to maneuver himself, and now with the Magsaysay organization. This is obviously a very large organization in the shipping organization, provide manning services for, I think they're one of the largest, maybe the largest in the world in that area. And he's helping them in their shared services in other areas because of both of his shared services background and his logistics background, of course. He is also Vice President of the European Chamber of Commerce. He is Honorary Consul of the Royal Danish Consulate. And an all-round heck of a nice fella. So please welcome Erik Nielsen, the President of Global Process Manager of the Magsaysay Group.
Good morning, everybody. Great to see so many known faces here. I have chosen to call this a Danish perspective because I do think that wherever you grow up, shapes you, forms you, gives you a certain outlook on the world. So as the first non-Asian speaker, I'll tell you on 2 slides just a little bit about Denmark. So the next slide, please. The agenda then is just really 2 slides about Denmark. One slide on my work background, because it's probably interesting for you to know why Rebecca and Richard asked me to be here today. And then some observations from working almost 9 years in the Philippines. You'll see some comparisons of Filipino and Western mentality. And some career tips. Hans this morning called them Hans's tips. We could call these 2 slides Erik's tips. So, if we just take a peek at Denmark. The next slide, please. It's nestled there in the northern part of Europe, just south of Norway, Sweden, just north of Germany. It's part of Scandinavia. It is actually the world's oldest monarchy. The current Queen Margrethe II can trace her family more than 1,000 years back to the first king of Denmark. It's a small country, 5.6 million people, less than a sixth of the area of the Philippines. But part of Scandinavia. The 3 countries there, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, actually used to be one country many years ago under a Danish king. It is a fairly wealthy country. GDP is high. It is usually in the top 5 or 10 in the world on that scale. The land area, however, is a lot larger if you include other Danish possessions like the Faroe Islands and not least Greenland, the largest island in the world, is also part of the Danish kingdom. And then I put in interesting fact. Studies or surveys, more than a couple of times, have shown Danes to be the happiest people in the world. I think something got lost in translation there, but Danes are certainly very content. The contentment ratio is very high. More than 80 or 85% of people say they're very content with their lot, despite paying the highest taxes in the world. We have income tax rates of 40 to 50%. We pay 25% VAT on everything. And yet, people are very content. Probably because they really feel they get something for their money. There's no corruption. We have free education, free universities, free roads, free schools, free hospitals, and all that. So you can see you get something for your money. But there it is, small country. And yes, probably part of shaping my outlook on the world. I grew up in the northern tip of the main peninsula on the left, called Jutland, in a farming community. So really far from big business, far from any dreams at that time of traveling the world. If we go to the next slide, you can see that out of this little country, some big companies were able to emerge after all. I put down some names of Danish companies that I think you will know, some of them, because some of them do business in the Philippines. Maersk is mentioned there, as Richard said, the largest container shipping company in the world with more than 600 ships. I did not include, I can see, ISS, which now has about 5,000 employees in the Philippines. But there are some fairly big names there. Right, then just one slide on my background. You have the companies there on the left. I've been fortunate to travel around with Maersk for 31 years. That is a lifetime for many of you in the room. And that took me to the Philippines in November 2004. And as Richard said, initially as the country head here, that was not very interesting, not nearly as interesting as being country manager in Ecuador, which is where I was before. And that is because Maersk at that time was running a highly regional structure. The people wanted to decide everything that went on in Southeast Asia. So in October 2006, I got the chance to move over to Ortigas and be head of Shared Service Center of Maersk, a completely different operation. And I have to correct what Richard put in the write-up for today and what he mentioned just now. I never started that up, and I have actually not started up the operations of Regis or Magsaysay either in the BPO field. I have just expanded them dramatically, but the Maersk Shared Service Center was started up already 7 years before I joined in 1999 by virtue of a purchase of an American shipping company called Sealand. And Sealand had set this up in Ortigas, and Maersk bought Sealand in December 99, and suddenly, whoopty, had a shared service center. This had been growing nicely with 100 people a year, 100 positions a year. From 2007, however, we started adding 300 to 400 positions a year, moving into KPO, and that made it really interesting. So when I left Maersk in June 2010, rightly because they wanted to put me back in head office, perhaps 5 years in the same job. But at that time in June 2010, Maersk Shared Service Center had 1,800 employees. Now they have 3,000, so they're really moving fast. And yes, in July 2010 I joined Regis, which was set up in 2009 and had 135 employees when I joined. Now I believe it's like 450 or 500 doing IT and mainly F&A. And I got the chance from last year to join the Magsaysay Group, a company called Global Process Manager Inc., which offers a different take on outsourcing. For companies that would like to try outsourcing to the Philippines but don't want to set up a legal entity and bother with SEC registration and taking an office lease and put in the country management team, etc., they can come to us and we'll provide the facilities, the IT, recruitment, HR service, payroll, and all that. So it's basically like Regis, but with staff on our contract working for them and doing whatever they need to have done. We have client teams ranging between 3 FTE and 95 FTE, and we try to expand with their needs. So far in 6 years of doing this, no one has moved out. We are trying to grow with our clients' needs. But of course they can move out if they wish. At the bottom, I put 4 other activities that I don't get paid for at all, but it's interesting. Richard mentioned being the Danish consul here. Denmark has no embassy, so I'm remotely running a small consulate in Makati. That's an interesting set of issues, different people you meet. Danes are good at getting in trouble anywhere in the world, so also here, and we have to help them sometimes. Usually though, it's about certifications, attestations, licenses, and not least of course the CENOMA, the Certificate of No Marriage, so that a Danish guy can marry a Filipina. I have not yet seen the other way around. So I would also mention the last one, perhaps the Nordic Business Council of the Philippines, because it's something we just set up. I was part of starting it. We got SEC registration in December. In January we had the first AGM, and we have more than 40 members and are still growing. Our focus is particularly the Scandinavian countries and the Baltic countries. So enough on that. Some observations through my close to 9 years here. Now, the next ones, don't get shocked, but I have actually lifted this from an interesting little book called Working with Filipinos. It's now out of print, but they quoted this survey on how do Filipinos see Westerners. I'm not going to go through each point. You can see them yourself. It's actually pretty scary. How are we able to do any work here? But I do think we need to understand some of this, because perception is reality in some cases. It takes a long time to change perceptions, or maybe it's not even possible. It reminds me of what someone told the former British ambassador Stephen Lilly before he took up his assignment in the Philippines 4 years ago. He said to him, "Oh, you'll have a great time in the Philippines, so long as you don't expect to change anything." And that is perhaps a bit typical, not just of the Philippines, but perceptions take time to change. So if we know this, we may see the wake-up call and see the need to not try to implement the way we work back home, but understand what the situation is around us, understand the importance of delicadeza when things have to be done in a very Filipino way. But there is also the other way around in this survey, how some foreigners see some Filipinos. Again, it's stereotyped, so please don't be offended. Some of these are issues for foreigners to work here and for Filipinos to work with foreigners. Some are not. But, well, I think most people can recognize a few of these situations. So on the next few slides, I've just recapped some main observations. In Denmark, we believe very much in equality. So the boss may have just one more stripe on his shoulder, but he's very much part of the team. He takes his share and is expected to. He's not someone hiding in a corner office, not doing any work because now he made it to manager. In fact, he probably does not have a corner office. There are companies in Denmark where even the CEO has to come in every day and find his workstation among the people, because that's the way he's chosen to do it. Whereas in the Philippines, there is a lot more respect for the boss, and I could hear from the initial reaction that you recognize this situation as well. I've seen also a difference in terms of opinion, and this can be why we are considered rude sometimes. We are very much to the point, and Filipinos are not. If you ask someone straight out, what do you really think about this project? Can we do it? Should we do it? Some people may tend to try and find out first, what's the right answer here? What does he want? If he wants us to back him up, fine, but it can be a bit difficult. But it's also good. It offends fewer people. And this is also typical in terms of way of life, the way Danes and some Europeans think. We are quite individualistic. Many people think, what's in it for me? In terms of remuneration or promotion, or Filipinos have this wonderful barkada setting where everything or most things are done in groups. And that's absolutely great. It's also great in a hiring situation. If you get a good person in and he or she will make a few referrals, you can have 5 suddenly, because he will say, it's much greater over here and the benefits are so and so. It can of course also go the other way around, to the great frustration of managers here, that suddenly you lose 5 people because they were friends. So it works both ways. But my lesson is Filipinos move in groups, and I think you see it when you, if someone sends out a wedding invitation, there may be no reply instantly because everybody's trying to find out who else is going. It's not so much about me wanting to go. On the contacts as well, Danes may tend to ask HR for what they need, or they will ask boss for what they need. They will have these contacts one-on-one or with a few people wherever they can get help. Filipino employees may ask their buddies or their workmates for career advice. They may ask the buddy, how does this thing work in this company? Where do I get this? Instead of asking HR or the boss. So the contacts are all over, and it's probably even a strength of this society. If it should happen that someone gets a bit annoyed at a situation, the foreigner may tend to show he's angry or annoyed. But don't worry, it's very situational. It is not because he's angry with you, the person. He's just angry with some error or something that happened or didn't happen. Filipinos tend to put a brave face on it and not show it, but beware. There is something underneath. It may only come out the day you get the resignation letter. This is also a frustration of foreign managers, that some people choose to resign instead of approaching the people who could actually change the reason for which they resign. So rather than trying to improve on it, they may just leave. All right. On problem handling, problems are there to be solved, but in some settings, they are here to be avoided. Some Filipinos may think if we just leave it alone, it may go away. But I tend to think that the first mistake is often the cheapest. So let's try to get straight to it, get it resolved. I have a great example of this in a very small way. One of my predecessors, country manager of Maersk here in the 1990s, was living in a big house in Forbes Park, so he had a pool in the garden. And after some months, he could not understand why his water bill was so high. It turned out that the pool was leaking about this much every day. But instead of anybody telling him about it, the guard or the gardener just put a hose in the pipe every morning, in the pool every morning, to fill it up, thinking, well, his pool is full, the master must be happy. But they never told him about the leak. And of course, this guy got pretty upset when he found out why his water bill was so high. So somewhere in history in the Philippines, someone shot the messenger. There can be reluctance to bring bad news to the table, even if you are not associated with it, because you could risk being associated with the problem just by telling about it. So maybe there's something to learn there. Just be frank, bring it out. Punctuality, it's not an issue in my company, in Magsaysay, but in some companies it is, or the infamous wedding invitation again. I think it's only a foreigner who's been here a short while who will show up at the time the invitation says you should be there. But it's also a charm, and it's far from the only country where this happens. When I lived 5 years in Ecuador, we had exactly the same situation. When I could not help getting involved in non-work activities there, so I was involved in the Chamber of Shipping. And they would often send out emails for a meeting starting at 10, with a view to really starting at 11. That's what they put in the invitation. So who wants to show up at 10, of course, when you don't even expect it to start on time? But what they did, when they really wanted to make sure that people were there on time, they called it Hora Britannica, British hour. So you knew, if you got an invitation, British hour, that was when it was expected to start, really, for sure. So I was wondering, why don't they do that all the time? But anyway, it's a charm as well. A couple of things I have learned through 9 years, or rather, no, through more than 30 years in corporate life. I think it is important to choose a career, a job that you really burn for, that you really find interesting. As one of the previous speakers quoted from Confucius, if your hobby is your work, it doesn't feel like work. So if you choose something you're really great at, or that you really are very, very interested in, I'm sure that the employment opportunities, the career opportunities will come along as well. I know someone who knew that she was poor in maths. She was great in languages and so on, but maths and sciences was what she chose to study, thinking, then I'm all round, then I'm more employable. With the result, however, that you come out with exams that are, or exam results that are sort of mediocre. I think it is a better strategy to go for what you're really good at or really interested in, and then you can get even better and excel at that. The second point is also important. Find a boss or superior that you look up to, that you want to emulate, that you want to copy at least some things from, because otherwise you are forever second-guessing your boss, or thinking, I could have done that better, or I wouldn't have done that myself, or all this gossip and chismes start, diba? So, also the last one, this really refers to a big company setting like Maersk. When you're in the Maersk head office, you're with 2,000 people, very clever people, and it's inevitable that if you spend 10, 12, 15 years there, there'll be someone overtaking you. There'll be someone with the right face, with the right MBA, etc., running past you in your career. So be nice to them. I have had trainees working for me who later ended up being executive vice presidents or even my boss. So be nice on the way up. I'm not saying that you need to be going down later, but it will happen after maybe 15, 20 years of corporate life. You get a bit closer to that project management office in the corner where they stack you away when you have not so many responsibilities anymore. And I would also say that being in business, in corporate life, is much more about EQ than IQ. And I cannot say it any better than Maya Angelou said. People will forget what you said or did, but not how you made them feel. Did we feel empowered? Did we feel it was fun to work with this guy? Or was it just dictatorship, where we just treated like slaves? It's extremely important to have some empathy and know what is your impact on other people. The second one is about courses and training. I've seen over the years quite a few people, and even companies, treating training like a perk, like now it's your turn. But if you don't need it, don't spend time on it. Don't make it just a pretty course folder on your shelf. Conversely though, be sure to ask for the training you really feel you need. Can be presentation skills, can be assertiveness training, can be team leader training. If you think you need it, ask for it, and I'm sure you'll get it. You can't beat City Hall. This is something I've learned being stationed in branches around the world. HQ will always be right. Even when they roll out a new campaign and you have some reservations and saying this will not fly in our market, it's quite rare if you can convince them so. Sometimes I've seen examples of them rolling it out anyway, learning from their mistakes and saying, oh, okay, you were right. So I've had many futile discussions with head office, and it's just a piece of advice. If you are not in the head company, listen to them at least. You cannot always fight it. And the last one is what I've learned managing large groups and BPO companies. I think that unlike at least Europe and maybe India, collective rewarding works a lot better here. If someone has come up with a macro or a new idea or something that saves 3 or 5 people's work, fantastic. But rather than giving him 10 or 20,000 peso extra in the bank account next month, you should rather go to him and say, here's 10 or 20,000 pesos. Take your team out, give me the bill. And he'll take them out for karaoke or pizza or go-kart or whatever, and he will be the hero of his team. And that is worth, to most Filipinos, that is worth a lot more, that kind of recognition, than a bit of extra money in your account. And that's again the Barcada effect. Just a couple of leadership quotes to end with. In order to succeed, your desire for success should be greater than your fear of failure. It sounds obvious, but Bill Cosby put it just right. And I'm also quoting Regina Brett. Maybe some of you know her brilliant 50 life rules that you can find on the internet. One of them is, the best is yet to come. I think it's important to be optimistic. I'm a firm believer that some of the best years of my life are still ahead of me. So let's be optimistic. And Christopher Columbus said the same as Bill Cosby, actually. You can never cross the ocean until you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. He just said it 500 years earlier, but it shows that it's a universal truth on the necessary attitude to take risks. You will not always be on familiar ground. In fact, probably in his case, he thought he would fall off the end of the earth when he kept sailing. But be prepared to take some uncalculable or unmitigated risks now and then. So, in maritime theme, or with Christopher Columbus on my mind, I do wish you all a fair wind and smooth sailing for your journey. Thank you.
Very good, Erik. Thank you very much. And Erik will be part of the panel afterwards, so we'll be glad to have him. Okay, thank you very much. Erik Nielsen, ladies and gentlemen.